One and all, welcome to this edition of COVID Conversations. I am honored and pleased to have someone I've been trying to track down for a while, Reverend Warnock, who is a Senate candidate in the state of Georgia. This is the election of all elections, January 5th, and today is the second day of early voting in the state of Georgia. First of all, welcome, Reverend Warnock, senatorial candidate. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. And look, it's a great day. I'm hanging out with April Ryan. It doesn't get any better than that.
That's right. That's right. And as you know, I'm in the Baltimore area, work at the White House, but in the Baltimore area. But Baltimore was once your stomping ground. You pastored at one of the preeminent churches in this area called Douglas Memorial in Baltimore. Members include former Mayor Kurt Schmoke. So when you ran, I said, oh, okay. I said, I know him from Baltimore. So, but it's good to always have that connection. And I know a lot of people in Baltimore are happy for you because there is a connection to Baltimore.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here with you. I was there in Baltimore as pastor of Douglas Memorial for 5 years before being called to the Ebenezer Baptist Church here in Atlanta, where I have served as senior pastor for the last 15 years. And listen, I've been exceedingly blessed. I grew up in public housing down in Savannah, Georgia. I'm one of 12 children in my family. 12 children. My folks are both preachers. They clearly read the Bible, that verse where it says, be fruitful and multiply.
And there was a lot of fruit there, right?
Apparently they took that very seriously. And I'm number 11 out of 12.
So you're the knee baby. You're the knee baby.
That's right. Oh, the knee baby. Exactly.
That's a Southern term for those of you who don't know.
Baby next to the baby is the knee baby.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. And I'm the first college graduate in my family from a 4-year institution. And, I got there certainly through hard work, grit, and determination. My parents poured that into me. But I also wouldn't be here were it not for Pell Grants, low interest student loans. I'm an alum of the Upward Bound program. I'm sure there are folks watching who know about that. It's another good federal program for kids who are likely to be the first college graduate in their family. TRIO has been around. And, I haven't talked about this actually. Maybe talking to you is what gets my, it's got me thinking about this even more. The TRIO programs that I came out of, which is a federal program, the idea for that actually, as I understand it, came from C.T. Vivian. Reverend C.T. Vivian, who was one of my heroes.
Yeah.
Someone I got to know here in Atlanta, a stalwart and champion for voting rights. And then even before that, I'm a Head Start baby, which is another good federal program where you make sure that poor children growing up in communities that don't have the same kinds of resources that others may have access to the kind of enrichment that all of us should want for our children. I jokingly say to folks all the time that I'm sorry to tell you that no matter how smart you are, you'll never be as smart as you were between ages 0 and 4. It all kind of went downhill after that. That's when the brain is literally growing and developing, and those neurons are firing in a particular kind of way. And we can narrow that word gap that folks are talking about, the brain science. And so you look at me, I'm an iteration of the best of the American dream and what we strive for. This idea of certainly personal responsibility, but personal responsibility needs to be yoked to good public policy. And I'm running now for the U.S. Senate because it's harder now for kids growing up in struggling families all across Georgia and all across our country than it was for me. And I want to create opportunity. I think the wealthy and the well-connected are pretty well taken care of in terms of representation in Washington. They don't suffer from lack of representation. I think ordinary people, working families, need a senator who understands their struggles.
So you're someone who was not born with a silver spoon in your mouth. You grew up in a religious family. Both parents are ministers in the South, one of 12, took part in many federal programs to get you to the point where you are today. You attended Morehouse and HBCU. You are a Black man in America who's gone through the ranks, you've been in ministry, and you went from various place to various place, and now you are at Ebenezer Baptist Church Place where Dr. King preached. One of your parishioners happened to be the late John Lewis. Did you talk to Congressman Lewis before his death about this moment, about you wanting to sit in the U.S. Senate? And what did he say to you?
Yes, I'm very blessed to have known John Lewis. I first met him when I was a college student at Morehouse. And I didn't imagine then that one day I'd be his pastor. And certainly we talked about the fact that I was running for the Senate. He was very supportive. I'm blessed to have earned his endorsement. He was able to do that. And I feel honored that I was able to be with him in those last few weeks, those last few months, the last few days. Within days of his death, I was there at his bedside. I was able to tell him how much I loved him and love him and how much he meant to me and so many others. And he was such an inspiration. And so as we are in the midst of this election cycle, I'm thinking about him. Today's the first day of early voting here in Georgia. Early voting begins today, December 14th, goes through December 31st. And January 5th is election day, but we really shouldn't be talking about election day. It's election season. And so folks need to be voting right now. Early voting has begun and folks need to show up. When I think about John Lewis and what he paid, the price that he paid, we owe it to the likes of John Lewis, C.T. Vivian, Miss Boynton, who was gassed on that bridge, and so many others. Fannie Lou Hamer, who stood up and said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And we owe it to ourselves and to the future to make sure that we show up. This is a defining moment in American history.
So you are working with, you have worked with the great Stacey Abrams. I mean, I'm telling you, she has an invisible cape and she's flying through the air. She's making things happen. You worked with her on the efforts to get people out to vote. But here you stand in this runoff because you did not make, no one in this senatorial race got the majority. Do you believe that there is enough energy right now? Because I'm looking at the polls, depending upon where it lands. I mean, it's neck and neck between you and Kelly Loeffler. One poll says you're up by 1. Another poll says she's up by 3. I mean, it all depends. It all depends who's polled. But do you believe right now there is enough energy in the state of Georgia for you to make it over the top? I mean, for all intents and purposes, being the underdog could really be a good thing to get you over the top in the way history shows us.
We can win this race, and we just have to decide that that's what we're going to do. I'm moving all across this state. I was in 8 different cities and towns this weekend. And I have to tell you, there's a lot of energy on the ground everywhere I've been going, moving. And, you know, especially when I go to these small rural towns, the folks there are surprised to see me. I'm surprised that they're surprised. And I asked them, well, why are you surprised? They said, well, we're not really accustomed to folks who are running for the U.S. Senate coming through our little town. We haven't seen a United States senator or somebody running for the Senate. And that's surprising to me because it never occurred to me that I would run to be the U.S. senator for the whole state and only focus my efforts, say, in Metro Atlanta. It's really important that we make sure that these small rural towns all across our state are not left behind. In fact, that's where the hospitals are closing, for example. So one of the things that I've been advocating for years, long before I was running, is Medicaid expansion. Georgia is one of only 12 states that still refused to expand Medicaid. And as a result of that, we've had 9 hospitals close in 10 years. Those hospitals are in the rural areas, and it is devastating rural healthcare. It's also a drag on those local economies. And so I've been going through all of these places, little places like Colbreth County and Thomasville and Montezuma and Buena Vista, small little towns that have been hollowed out, by years and decades of neglect. And what we need is a vision that pulls all of us together, that reinvests in Georgia, reinvests in America, is focused on rural broadband. You drive through huge swaths of our state where your phone call drops, you can't connect, and you can't even farm efficiently as you should be able to nowadays if you can't connect, if you're not connected to the internet. So I'd like to see us push, even as we're trying to make our way through this pandemic. I think, April, we need to be thinking about an infrastructure program, green jobs, green energy, repair our roads and bridges, and connect these areas that have so long been neglected.
The digital divide, as you said, as well, part of the infrastructure. And let's talk about COVID in this moment. And I'm going to come back to going to these small towns. COVID is real. And you've got people, I'm watching the news in Atlanta, and they're saying, make sure, you're hearing state officials, make sure you're safe, wear your mask when you go to early vote, things of that nature. I understand also in the state of Georgia, since the pandemic, you have 450,000 cases in the state of Georgia. And now we have the vaccine being distributed throughout the country. What say you at this moment as it relates to the vaccine, as it relates to early voting, and as it relates to you running for office? What do you say in this moment?
Well, I'll say the same thing I've been saying for months. Number one, we need to pay attention to the science and listen to the scientists. And it's really unfortunate that this virus has become politicized. The virus is not red or blue. And wearing a mask shouldn't be a red or blue issue, Democrat or Republican. And it is these kinds of political games, a lack of a national coordinated strategy for months and months, that has created an American tragedy of proportions unlike anything we've ever seen. 300,000 Americans dead. That's a lot of empty chairs during the holiday season. That's a lot of broken hearts spread all across our country. I mean, we ought to pause and take and really just take that in. I think, I'm a pastor, and one of the things I encourage people to do is not to rush too easily through your grief, that you need to take it in and walk through it and not try to be dismissive of it. And I think we as a nation, at some point, we're going to have to take stock of what has happened to us, the real human tragedy as a result of terrible leadership.
Are you concerned? Are you concerned with the election process? You've got the president of the United States coming down to Georgia, ridiculing Georgia. Georgia is one of the states he's upset with. And let's call a thing a thing. This president is upset with the states where Black people put Joe Biden over the top, be it Michigan, be it Pennsylvania, be it Georgia. And he's ridiculing the process and talking about the integrity. Do you believe that you will have the numbers that you need coming to vote for you because they believe the process is fair? Or do you believe that this president has caused a question about the integrity in Georgia for there not to be a race that is integral?
The four most powerful words in a democracy are the people have spoken. Mm. And the people of Georgia stood up on November 3rd, and they spoke with a clear voice. And they have decided to send Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to the White House. We've had 3 counts here in Georgia, one by the machine, and we counted 5 million votes by hand. And the person I'm running against, Kelly Loeffler, she's aiding and abetting this assault on the credibility of a democratic process. And so we have to stand up in this moment. And I think, April, that, the clearest way that the people can stand up is to go back and do on January 5th what they did on November 3rd. Send a powerful and overwhelming message to politicians who play games with our democracy, that we're not having it, that you will not diminish our voices. We know what's on the ballot. It's not just the name that's on the ballot. Healthcare is on the ballot. COVID relief, which we so desperately need and haven't seen in months, is on the ballot. Voting rights is on the ballot. Criminal justice reform. And so I'll tell you, I've been moving all across the state. I was in 8 different cities and towns this weekend, and there's a lot of energy on the ground. I think much of the country didn't see Georgia coming on November 3rd.
They didn't. Trust and believe.
They didn't believe it. And here we are. But we're going to seal the deal come January 5th. I mean, what an amazing moment in American history. Here we are dealing with a once in a century global pandemic, an economic turn down, the likes of which we haven't seen since the Great Depression, and a renewed conversation about race and bigotry in light of the tragic deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery right here in this state, Rayshard Brooks, whose funeral I officiated and whose eulogy I preached. And out of Georgia, the native home state, the home state of Martin Luther King Jr., you have an African-American man, preacher, who grew up in public housing, pastor of the pulpit and church where Dr. King served, running alongside a young Jewish man, the son of an immigrant, mentored by John Lewis, my parishioner, running alongside each other in this defining moment in American history in which there are those who are trying to take us back. And I see in that a powerful signal of hope. And we are inspired, John Ossoff and I, by the likes of Abraham Joshua Heschel and Martin Luther King Jr. When Heschel marched alongside King, he said, I felt like my legs were praying. And we need that same kind of energy and movement in this moment. I'm feeling it on the ground. And just wait. We're ready here in Georgia.
So let's talk about, you brought up the issue of race. And I'm gonna tell you, I was one of the millions of people watching that night of that debate. I thought it was a Saturday Night Live skit. I was like, what the heck is this? I used the word heck, Pastor, but the word hell is in the Bible, so I can say that. I was like, huh? I mean, from Jeremiah Wright and understanding being in the church, I understand a lot. The Black Baptist Convention, what was the convention that a lot of the Baptist,
the National Baptist Convention, National Baptist Convention,
right, where Jeremiah Wright was part of, and many people knew him.
Actually, Jeremiah Wright was a member of the UCC.
Okay, but he was right, but he was part of that, and a lot of ministers know him. So you got smeared with that. You got smeared with radical liberal. I heard that so many times. You're a radical liberal. Hillary Clinton tried to take the high road when she was called Crooked Hillary, but it stuck because she kept the high road. You never really went and deflected. Do you think that hurts you when you go to those small towns that are not used to you, are not used to seeing a blackface? Because let's be true, there are a lot of communities in rural America that still have yet to see a large swath of Black people, and they don't understand. They believe the things that people like to say, to include Kelly Loeffler, who are saying.
I think Kelly Loeffler has a lot to explain that she cannot explain. She's been in that seat for 10 months. She didn't waste any time enriching herself. She heard about a global pandemic most of us knew nothing about, and she dumped millions of dollars of stock, profited from the pandemic. She managed to shelter her own family's investment, but she didn't do anything for the folks who were sheltering at home. And so she's trying to change the subject. And I understand why, because she has a lot of explaining to do. I've been talking to people all across this state, in the urban areas, in the rural areas, and they're not impressed with this kind of cookie cutter canned political calculation and response that we're seeing. They're wondering who in the world is going to provide them with COVID-19 relief that they haven't seen in months. I was in Athens a few days ago visiting small businesses, and they're struggling, just trying to hang on. And when we saw some relief a few months ago, the Shake Shacks of the world, the Ruth's Chris of the world, the LA Lakers found themselves at the front of the line as if they're struggling businesses, and ordinary businesses, small businesses that are the real job creators in our country, found themselves at the back of the line. And so when I look at those uh, small business owners, the families that are facing eviction, if we don't get something passed so that the eviction moratorium doesn't end, uh, student debt moratorium doesn't end, the folks who are trying to get unemployment insurance, if we don't respond to their needs, they're going to be in trouble. And I think they're looking for a senator who understands the struggles of ordinary people. I'm a pastor. I've spent my whole career in ministry walking alongside folks in their struggles, and I intend to take their concerns to the U.S. Senate.
Yeah, as a pastor, you're somewhat of a psychologist, a social worker. You're a whole bunch. A lot of people lean on you for help, and that's I guess power means service, and preachers serve. If you're a good preacher, you're supposed to serve, in my opinion, my humble opinion. But in that service, you have people who are hurting financially. And just talking about that, COVID has been a destroyer on almost every level. And I'm going back to the debate. And your economic plan was based on Matthew 25. Talk to me. How do you believe that you can adequately bring people out of the brink off of Matthew 25? Because I want to know your equation. I hear you. And there are a lot of people who believe in the Bible, but help us understand. Break it down. Give us get in the weeds of Matthew 25 for us.
Well, let me just say that my faith is a foundation for my values and my convictions. But what I'm lifting up when I mention Matthew 25, I'm not making, an argument simply based on the New Testament. I'm making an argument about the values that I think resonate with all of the great faith traditions and all the great moral traditions that are not necessarily based on any particular faith tradition. But that text says, I was hungry and you fed me. I was naked and you gave me clothes. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was sick and I was in prison and you visited me. And someone asked, Lord, when were you hungry? How in the world were you thirsty, naked, sick, a stranger, in prison? And the Lord answers, inasmuch as you've done it unto the least of these, you've done it also unto me. And so the lesson is that the acid test of our faith and our moral claims is the degree to which we are committed to the most marginalized members of the human family. And I think the acid test of a government, of a nation, because by the way, that text actually is not about individuals. It says that at the day of judgment, the nations will be lined up. So it's really a moral lesson about what does it mean to be a good country, a good nation. And according to the text, it's based on your treatment of the least of these. And so the question for me is, what does that look like in public policy?
Right.
Certainly, it means you don't cut off your neighbor's health insurance, particularly in the middle of a pandemic, especially when you're the wealthiest nation on the planet. And so I'm going to continue to try to call us to our highest and our best. This is work I've done all of these years as a pastor. When Georgia refused to expand Medicaid in the state, I went to the governor's office and I said, Mr. Governor, you must expand Medicaid. And I insisted on it, engaged in acts of civil disobedience, and was there willing to accept the consequences of that. I did the same thing in the United States Capitol when we were passing a $2 trillion tax giveaway to the richest of the rich while taking needed resources away from the children's health care program. I stood in the rotunda of the U.S. Capitol because I had not been elected a U.S. Senator yet, and began to say that a budget is not just a fiscal document, it's a moral document. It says who we are and what we believe and who we think matters and who doesn't. And I was taken away by the Capitol Police again on that day as I was trying to stand up for what I think is the best in the American spirit. And I'm running for the U.S. Senate with the hope that in just a few weeks, I'll encounter those Capitol Police officers. Again, this time they won't be escorting me to central booking. They'll be taking me to my new office as the next United States Senator, where I can stand up for health care, a livable wage, voting rights, the kind of reform, including criminal justice reform, we so desperately need.
If you and Ossoff win, it's 50-50, and Kamala Harris will be the tiebreaker. If you don't win, let's say you and Ossoff don't win, what happens to the nation?
Listen, we have to keep fighting the good fight. I fully expect that Georgia is we're going to win. So let me begin there. We're going to win both of these seats. And I think if you were on the ground here in places like Warner Robins, where I was last night, speaking to a packed drive-in outside rally, if you were with me in Albany and in Augusta this weekend, you would feel the energy. My hometown down in Savannah, there is something happening. And when I went to early vote, there was a line wrapped around the building. People feel the urgency. They know the job isn't done. And I have faith in the people of Georgia that they're going to send me, not for me, but because so much is at stake: healthcare, a livable wage, the dignity of work.
I want to ask you one last question, and I'm so honored and thankful that you took this time in the midst of early voting to talk to me, because the stakes are so high. The election season, this is it. This was the next piece. And I keep looking at the state of Georgia. In the early 90s, I lived in Tennessee. I lived and worked in Tennessee, and I would travel always to Atlanta. But going through a lot of those towns from where I worked in Tennessee, you saw a different mindset. I remember Oprah Winfrey and that Forsyth County segment that she had. Georgia has changed from the 80s and 90s to 2020. Who is Georgia today? Because we saw Hillary Clinton. I believe that Hillary Clinton, there was a chance if she would have maybe gone into Georgia a little bit more, because she stopped talking about gun control at that time to bring in the Southern vote. And then we saw Stacey Abrams rise up. And now look, Georgia has finally turned blue. Who is Georgia? I mean, we hear the South shall rise again, but is it rising a different way now? Tell me who Georgia is today.
The South is changing, and Georgia is the tip of the spear. We have been working hard in this state now for about a decade. Not only is this not the same Georgia that you referenced 35 years ago, the state has changed considerably since 2014. We've been registering hundreds of thousands of voters in this state. I was chair of the New Georgia Project that Stacey Abrams started. She ran in 2018 for governor, and out of 4 million votes cast, she lost by less than 55,000 votes out of 4 million, 1.4%. And that while running against a man who was her opponent on the field, running the bases like her, except he was also the umpire, calling balls and strikes. And with his thumb clearly on the scale,
he ran the game. He
barely squeaked by, barely. And the good news is that after Stacey lost by less than 55,000 votes, we've registered in this state 800,000 new voters. 49% of them are people of color, 45% of them are under 30. And so this is the new Georgia. It's increasingly diverse. It's inclusive, it's open, it's ready for the future. It is the Georgia where Lucy McBath sits in a seat in Congress that not long ago was held by Newt Gingrich, and where Carolyn Bordeaux, right next to her, is holding the other Senate seat, and where Nikema Williams will now rise to continue the legacy of John Lewis, and where John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock, a young Jewish man and the pastor of Ebenezer Church, one mentored by John Lewis, the other pastor, John Lewis, are running for the 2 Senate seats. And we are delighted that Georgia's on everybody's mind these days. And we want to encourage you to continue to support us. And come January 5th, you're going to see one of those powerful inflection moments in American history where the democracy expands, includes more people. And we bend that arc that Dr. King used to talk about, that arc that bends toward justice. It bends only because we've been pulling on it, and we're going to bend it a little bit closer come January 5th.
This is the part where we play Ray Charles, Georgia on my mind. Sir, I thank you so much for your time. I thank you for this moment. This is history. This is history. And I feel sad for your congregants because when you become senator, you're leaving, right?
Listen, if I spend all my time talking to politicians, I might accidentally become one. So in the grand tradition of a representative democracy, I plan to stay very much connected to my church and to the people of my community.
All right. Well, we have a Democratic Senate candidate from the state of Georgia, Pastor Raphael Warnock. He is the pastor of the great historic Ebenezer Baptist Church, the church that Dr. King pastored in. The King family belongs to. One of the great parishioners happened to be the late Congressman John R. Lewis. We wish you blessings. I don't want to say luck because that's not in the church. You know, we wish you blessings.
What about now? Take it all.
No, don't say that.
I'm kidding. We're working hard. We're gonna make this happen.
Well, we'll see. And if you get to Washington, I'm going to be knocking on your door because I want to interview after COVID when we get the vaccine.
That's right.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, your folks who want to connect with us, go to warnock4georgia.com. Everything's spelled completely out. warnock4georgia.com. Folks have been asking about coming here. Listen, if you take Gladys Knight's midnight train to Georgia, just make it a virtual train. And go to my website. You can volunteer right from where you are. You don't have to come to Georgia. All
right. So, and you're still accepting donations and all of that, right? So
absolutely.
I don't deal with donations, but that's what he's saying. So Reverend Raphael Warnock, thank you so much. It's early voting in Georgia. You're awesome. Thank you. Good luck to you and Ossoff. And I hope I don't have to watch another Saturday Night Live moment. So I was screaming. Thank you, sir. Be well.
Thank you very much. Take care.